All right, I'm in St. Augustine, Florida, which is beautiful. This is right in the super old downtown area. The Cathedral Basilica, the Catholic Church, is right across the street. But I am at an Episcopal church meeting this gentleman right here. Is it Reverend Matt, Father Matt, Pastor Matt? What do I say?
It's whatever you want to call me.
Oh, man.
As long as there's cappuccino involved.
Oh, okay. Well, it looks like your bases are covered.
Yeah.
Here's a super sneaky secret. We've met before like 10 minutes ago.
Yep.
But this gives you the whole vibe of the city and gives you a sense of it. We started talking like 5 minutes ago, and immediately there were 100 things you were saying that were really interesting to me, and I kept cutting you off. So now, it's yours, man. Will you show me this church and tell me what it's about?
Come on inside. Welcome to Trinity Parish. You know, I've actually seen a bunch of your videos.
Thanks.
So yeah, I like them.
Cool.
I like them. They're good. Come on in. I'm
it.
honored to get to be a part of one of them.
Well, thanks for doing it. This is awesome.
Well, this is actually the new church. The original church was built about 70 years before this one.
And when was this one built?
And this is built in 1902 and opened in 1903, but built over a much older church that was here first. And we're actually the first Protestant church in the state of Florida and the first English language church in the state of Florida.
Was it all Spanish language or
It's all
Latin
Spanish.
before that?
Yeah, it was Spanish. So there was an English period from 1763 to 1783, and we had a little Anglican Church of England church down the street over here. Then the English left, and the Catholics thought we desecrated their worship space.
Oh, nuts.
So they took it apart brick by brick and rebuilt it in our vicar's lot across the street where the Cathedral Basilica still stands today.
So there's still stuff from that church over there?
That stuff from that church has been rebuilt in this lot. So they'll kind of tell you that they're from 1565. The truth is that they're from 1784. And they really opened that church in like 1805.
That
but
feels super personal. They took your bricks. Does
They
that come
took
up
our
at like
bricks.
church softball?
It actually
things?
does.
Like,
It actually
okay.
comes up in softball leagues. It comes up if you take their tour. If you take their tour, they will tell you that we're built in their bishop's lot, and they'd like their bishop's lot back. And I was on the tour one time, and I raised my hand. I said, well, I'm actually the priest across the street at the Episcopal Church over there, and I can confirm we are built on your old bishop's lot, but you are built in our vicar's lot, and so we'll trade you straight up. In Spanish Florida, you were free to be any kind of Catholic you wanted to be.
Oh, that's generous.
Yeah, and so you could, for example, escaped slaves could be free here as long as they were freely Catholic.
Okay.
So under American or English rule, you could be not free, and you were free, like you had religious freedom, but you didn't have economic freedom. So you had to kind of pick your poison back in the day. So anyway, the first town council says we need three things if this is going to be an American town. We need a school teacher, English, we need a librarian, and we need a Protestant pastor. And they write away for all three, but there's a yellow fever epidemic, so no one shows up except a 61-year-old Episcopalian missionary who says, look, I'm 61, I've done my thing for God, I got one more good one in me, and everyone goes, are you nuts? You're gonna die, it's a yellow fever epidemic. And he says, well, if I die, I die, I've done my thing. So they bring him down here. A week later, he's ready to get off the boat, and the city fathers roll out and they say, look, no one can come ashore, everybody's dying. And the guy says, look, are you going to tell an old man he can't come ashore? And they took him ashore, and he started helping the Catholic clergy. And so the irony is our clergy have always worked really well together, but our parishioners keep suing one another throughout history because those guys want the Episcopal lot back. And so twice we've had an act of Congress giving us title to the property.
Really?
Kind of funny, yeah. So this font...
That's so much stuff.
Oh, yeah. This font
wait,
built in...
Let me back up just for a second to make sure I'm tracking. When did the priest show up? What year was that?
1821.
And before that, there had briefly been...
Before that, in the
Episcopal
1760s
presence.
to 1780, there'd been an Anglican presence, Church of England. So when you have a revolution and you kick the English out, you can't call your church the Church of England because we're not doing English now. So what you do is you come up with the description, the Protestant Episcopal Church, the Protestant church with bishops. It's not a name, it's a description.
Right, okay.
So,
Okay.
so they retitle the church everywhere else, but here it's a Spanish colony, so there are no English churches.
So during
the Americans
that little...
take possession in 1821.
There we go. That's what I was
in
wondering.
1821, the Americans take possession of Florida. Andrew Jackson is the first territorial governor. And down comes a missionary named Andrew Fowler. He starts meeting with the town. We know this story really well because even though he was an old man at a 61-year-old guy, 23 years later, he writes a book about his experiences here. So
Wow.
he lived to a ripe old age.
And this congregation is directly descended from what he
Directly
did.
descended from him.
That's
So
pretty cool.
it takes them, it's slow to be in a tiny little backwater town in the South in the 1800s. The who's who of the church is sort of like the who's who of early Florida. In the font were baptized all 3 Civil War generals to come out of St. Augustine.
Which 3 generals were those?
So that's the great question, is which 3 generals were those? First of all, a little town of 1,500 people to have 3 generals is kind of spectacular.
Yeah.
So the first one, Edmund Kirby Smith, he was in the Hall of Statuary until he was removed recently. He was the last serving Confederate general because he was the general of Kirby Smithdom, which is what they called west of the Mississippi.
Okay.
So he's the last serving Confederate general because he's in Galveston, Texas, and he gets the news last.
Yeah.
They send a boyhood friend of his, a Union general named Edmund Davis. I guess they had a lot of Edmunds in those days. Edmund Davis, also baptized in this font. He's a friend of his, and so he sends him to take his surrender. Edmund Davis becomes the only Republican governor of Texas for 100 years. And if you know any Texans over the age of 55, they will tell you that growing up, they read that that was the worst governor in the history of Texas. And he was baptized right here. And the third one is a guy named William Wing Loring. And he was the one-armed general of the Civil War whose monument was just removed 3 years ago in the, in kind of the Black Lives Matter summer. And Loring is an interesting guy. They moved quote, Confederate monuments. Loring's actually wasn't a monument, it was his gravestone. He was actually buried there.
What did they do with him?
Well, they moved it to another location. And the reason they moved it is it had all of the flags of the nations that he fought for. So he fought for the United States, started out in the Mexican-American War, got his arm blown off. Most people say, I've done my bit for my country and go home after that, but he really likes being a soldier. So he becomes the general that takes people in wagon trains to the Oregon Country. Then he becomes the major in charge of the Oregon Country. During the Civil War, even if you were a Union soldier, you thought of yourself as your state, like the 3rd Illinois Regular or 3rd Massachusetts,
Sure.
infantry or whatever. Yeah. So he couldn't imagine himself fighting against fellow Floridians, and he resigned his commission, took a commission as a general in the Confederacy. After the war, though, you would think, like mostly if you fought on the wrong side, you're kind of an outcast. This guy gets sent with 2 Union generals by Sherman and Grant after the war to go to Egypt and help start the Egyptian army. Oh, yeah, exactly. So he fought...
This is the one-armed guy.
The one-armed man. Yeah,
Okay.
The one-armed man. So William Wing Loring, he spends 12 years leading troops of color and 4 years fighting to maintain slavery. So our narratives are not often, they're not always as simple as we make them out to be. Yeah, he's got a little bit of a complicated story.
Baptized here.
Baptized here.
Like not in this spot, but in this baptism.
So
in this font.
that's a question mark. We don't know. We have a receipt for a baptistry from 1841. We have a receipt for a pedestal from 1895. The pedestal says 1895. We don't have a receipt for a baptismal font, but I think they look stylistically, I think this looks like 1880s or 90s, not 1840s.
I'm not
this kind of
nuanced enough
Art
to tell you the
Nouveau.
difference.
So I don't really know, but we think for sure in the church, maybe in this font. According to our records, it was in this font. But I look at it and I just say, that looks Art Nouveau to me. It looks too new. So, okay, so going through the church,
Yeah.
coming up here, The left transept is actually the original, what's left of the original church. And in the 1903 remodel, one of the donors in the church wanted us to have a really nifty thing. He wanted us to have a signed Tiffany window. And apparently there are 40 signed Tiffany windows of the 1,500 he did. And apparently this is one of them. Now, it's not an overly attractive window subject-wise, but it's a great example of Tiffany's method. So if I'll turn the light off and you can see it better.
Okay, a couple of questions before we get further into that. Obviously, I've heard of Tiffany lamps, but I've never known what Tiffany means. I remember when I was hearing that when I was a kid, I pictured
Comfort
like
Tiffany.
the pop star.
Yeah.
But I
Louis
told him
Comfort
that.
Tiffany was an Art Nouveau glass guy.
Okay.
And he invented this technique of doing glass where he'd expose the oxides in the sand to create soft colors. That was one of Tiffany's two big technological breakthroughs. The other one is layering the windows. So if you come up here real close and look at this, you can see that some places it's like 5 layers deep. Some places it's 1 layer deep. So if you come look, like right here, here's a layer. That's 3 layers right
You
there.
do have to get close to make
You got
that
to
out,
get close to see it.
What am I looking at here? Is this a Roman officer?
This is out of Acts 10. It's the angel talking to Cornelius, looking for Peter to come and share Christ with him.
Oh, it says it right there, for crying out loud. And then when Peter shows up from Joppa, that's why he knew he was coming, was because of this
Exactly.
assumed interaction? Is that spelled out in the text?
Yeah, it's spelled out in the text. The angel appears to Cornelius, and then Jesus has an interaction too. So they both get hey, you got to go meet a friend. I got a guy.
So this scene couples with a pretty dramatic shift in the very early church, because that's the sheet being lowered from heaven, and don't declare anything unclean that the Lord has declared clean.
Exactly.
So that being in an Anglican church, I mean, you're coming on the heels of 1,500 years of what some would consider to be largely European Catholic thought, and then along comes the events of the 16th century. It just seems like this has some theological propriety and relevance to that.
We're a complicated Reformation, because you've got the Lutherans. That's really a theological Reformation. That's a recovery of doctrines. The Presbyterians, that's a recovery of preaching the text. We're a recovery of reading the Bible.
How do you mean?
Well, so what's really going on in the English Reformation is that you've got Henry VIII saying, "Hey, to make an error, I got to go this solo. I'm not really interested theologically in going solo, but in order to have an heir, I'm now interested in going solo. Mm-hmm. To go solo in an island, you have to have a navy, and a navy is very expensive.
Yeah.
All the money's tied up in the monasteries. So the king says, I'm going to take over the monasteries and give you guys a couple of bucks and get out of my hair."
Is that what he did with the dissolution of the monasteries?
That's the
He built a fleet
of the
that won in
monasteries.
1588?
Yeah, he enriched himself and built a fleet.
Oh.
So the dissolution of the
made that
monasteries is really where, that's really the Reformation in England, because the Archbishop of Canterbury realizes if we end up without this 8 or 9% of England that reads the Bible, prays the Bible, and goes out and does the Bible in good works every single day, if we lose them, this is going to be nasty, brutish, and short, to quote
So we got to get the
Englishman.
general populace to do this.
Let's make everyone a monk.
Okay.
We'll print Bibles in English. We'll chain them to pulpits. We'll hire people to read them all day. And we'll ring the bell twice a day and tell people to go to church. We'll build a bunch of tiny little churches on every street corner, because the purpose of church is to go read the Bible, pray the Bible, and do the Bible in the world. So it's kind of the 3 great Anglican rhythms are daily in the Word, weekly at the table, annually in the story of God. And those 3 rhythms shape disciples of depth and strength of character if you do the system, year in and year out, over and over. You read the opening preface to the original Book of Common Prayer, and Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, says that the goal is to read the Bible in its complete, read the entire Bible or the greater part thereof in the year. And so
Okay.
they were trying to recover the daily ordered reading of Scripture and praying of Scripture.
But move it beyond the walls of the monastery.
And move it to everybody.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, let me ask you this question then.
So where
as we look at
everybody
this
else,
space.
while Catholics are doing the priesthood,
Yeah.
and Protestants are doing the priesthood of the believer, Anglicans were doing the monkhood of the believer.
Interesting.
That's
I've never
really,
heard it put that way.
well, that's the Anglican distinctive, is we're doing the monkhood of the believer.
Well, I mean, you're putting the Bible in front of people so much that Nate
Yeah.
just ran into the place where you preach from it.
There you
Which
go.
I think is kind of a timely metaphor.
Sorry, Nate.
He's tough.
So by the way, this right here, this rectangle
Yeah.
is what's left of the original
Oh, yeah.
30 by 50 foot sanctuary. So
And it
the
ran this
original
way?
church went this way, and about the middle of that aisle is where the back wall was.
Okay.
They tore the back wall off, they put a chancel on it so that you could have communion. They tore that off and put one on an angle and made an L-shaped, kind of,
I've seen
kind
those.
of equal. And the bishop came in, took one look at it and said, "That's stupid, tear it down and start over." And that's when they built this.
You're talking about the dissolution of the monasteries, Henry VIII on up through Elizabeth and the defeat of the Spanish Armada, that window of time. I'm kind of scrambling my math here because you're telling me things I didn't know or connecting dots in new ways. But what I do know is this: every time I go into an Anglican or Episcopal church, I can tell. This is really distinctive. It seems like you guys really lean into the ship hole look for the nave.
Well,
It
I mean,
seems
mainly
like that.
that's because there were ship contractors were the only ones who know how to build a roof. A roof is the inside of a...
Well, that's what I wanted to know.
Yeah, it's the inside of a ship's hull is just like a roof.
What about the outside of Anglican churches? Is that kind of stone castle-y look that I associate with Episcopal churches, Anglican churches? Is that born out of repurposing the stonework from the monasteries?
Basically, it's born out of English architecture. This one was built in a real Gothic-y style with a bunch of pointy crinolines at the top, and they basically took them off year by year. They'd fall off, and they'd go, "Let's just leave that off." It was a little too fancy for the size of the building. Didn't really make sense.
What style would you call this now?
This is sort of it's Gothic meets Spanish revival. It's kind of a weird pastiche. The ladies that were here didn't want to tear down their old Coquina church, so they created this sort of long, low church. If an architect was looking at it and starting from scratch, they probably would have added 15 more feet of ceiling, which they didn't add to this because they were trying to match this side over here, to try to tie it all together. And when you look at it from the outside, it's very obvious from the plaza that this side is Gothic and this side is Spanish.
Okay. Yeah, I guess it did feel Spanish
Yeah.
walking up. You used an adjective there that I'm not sure I'm familiar with. Coquina. What does that mean?
Coquina is a stone made out of, it's a stone quarried here locally, and it's basically like lime and shells, and you cut it out, it's soft, and you let it dry, and it becomes hard. So if you look at the fort, that's made out of coquina.
Is it a naturally occurring substance,
It's a
or
naturally
is it
occurring
a concrete that you mix?
It's like a concrete that's occurring naturally. Half the city is built of coquina.
How does that hold up?
When Sir Francis Drake attacked the fort here, they lofted from the island. They lofted cannonballs over, and they stuck in the coquina of the fort. And they'd go out at night and pry them out, and then put them in their cannons and shoot them back at the British.
I'm trying to act like I've been there, done that. Like score a touchdown, just hand the ball to the referee and keep moving.
Yeah.
Somebody says something super interesting and fascinating historically, but you're kind of a history guy, act like you knew it. But I don't think I can hide my excitement. Francis Drake attacked St. Augustine?
Oh, yeah.
Did he win?
No.
What?
Well, it was...
But he was an agent of the Queen, right?
He was an agent of the
He's a
Queen.
privateer who got co-opted for royal use, which is kind of a metaphor for them getting the giant church over there with the Spanish Catholics.
Yeah, so they burned the city down, but they could never take the fort because the fort was made out of coquina and they couldn't batter their way through it. Yeah,
And that's what Drake was here to do?
Yeah,
plunder
Drake
the
was here
town,
to
take
plunder.
the town?
Yeah, sort of.
But he couldn't occupy it because he couldn't get through the fort.
Couldn't get in. Yeah, couldn't get in.
How about that? What would that be, 1580s?
Oh, I don't, you know what, my history is escaping me. There were two privateers that attacked like 75 years apart. I don't want to make a date up because then it'll be immortalized on video.
Yeah, we can always edit
Okay,
it to make it
so
sound good, or you
great
can just
story
hold that
here.
mug to your mouth and say a date, and then we'll just Google it in a second, and yeah, that's a trick.
The one thing that's left over from that 1895 bad remodel was this window right here. It's dedicated to one of the pastors, a guy named Elihu Root, who was 72 when he got here, worked as the priest here until he was 80. The board had to force him out, and they said that younger people couldn't relate to him. Well, the St. Monica's Guild that donated that was the junior and senior high girls who went around town and did like song and dance routines and raised money to buy that triptych window from Germany. And it took them like 3 years of saving to get it. And it got as far as New York, and they ran out of money, and the parents had to bail them out.
So what is this depicting? Jesus saying, "Let the little children come to me"?
Yeah, this is "Let the little children come unto me." Yeah, it's not really
ironic thing to put in that window, given that Reverend Root was forced out for being not relatable.
Not relatable to children, and
Yeah.
funded by the children.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was we just want you to know that Jesus likes us, and so did Reverend Root.
How about that? When I hear the term mainline denomination, I think PCUSA,
Methodist,
ELCA, United Methodist.
Yeah, all of those.
I do not think of,
Episcopal?
well, I do think of some Episcopals, but just the imagery, the storytelling, the points of theological emphasis in this church smack of something a little bit more historically conservative than what I think of when I hear the term mainline. Where do you fit in the family tree that
I don't
way?
know that. So I don't, we kind of talk about this a lot because people show up at your church today and they want to know, what kind are you? Are you pink or blue? And,
Is that a thing is there pink and blue Episcopal?
I mean, that's every church in America right now is getting the "which kind are you?" And we just tell people we're just not thinking in those terms. I mean, what we're trying to do is preach the Bible, pray the historic prayers of the church, and love the people that show up, full stop. So we're not looking at our current culture and trying to interpret our Bible through the lens of our current culture. We're looking from our scripture through the lens of the historic church and teaching people to follow Christ through the lens of the historic church and the historic prayers and the scriptures as they were delivered.
Where do you see it going from here? Do you think that moment, that pressure that you're feeling right now is this is?
We're not feeling much pressure. I mean, attendance is up. We've got more kids in church than ever in our history. We've got more new families than ever in history. We're growing 10% a year, both in attendance and in income. Like, this is just kind of a fun. The thing that's really interesting is all of a sudden we have 12 either retired clergy or just kind of retired early clergy in our church. So
this is
not a big church, but yeah, 12 retired clergy go here. Only one of them's an Episcopalian.
How does that work? Why are they here instead of going to churches that are from their own pedigree?
It's a really interesting thing, and I'm not exactly sure, but I'm honored that they've chosen to hang their shingles with us,
Okay. At the risk of sounding like I'm asking in a crass way, why is it working here? Why is something that looks this old, where the imagery is this old, in a place that's this old, working in the most modern of times modern has ever been? And I don't mean that just in the way like that you could say that about any given moment in history. I mean, I don't know that we've ever been as smitten with who we are right now and how stupid everyone before us
everybody else
is culturally as we are right now in this moment. And so it would seem like intuitively, if you want to get people to see the beauty of Jesus, we need to do what culture is doing and ditch everything about the past and try to be as right now as possible. And
we're non-relevant.
Well, why
whatever
is that working?
relevant,
Why is that
we're
effective?
anti-relevant. So I have I've tried to think about this, and I have a theory on it. My theory is that relevant works well when the world is your friend. Like if you think about the ways. Yeah, I came from a pagan background, but spent 20 years on Young Life staff and then in big evangelical
in youth
churches.
ministry.
Yeah,
stuff.
youth ministry.
Okay.
And I think that once upon a time, the world was our friend. And if you think about the way the contemporary church, the Andy Stanley joke, the contemporant church, that video he did years ago that was very funny. The ways that the world connects with the church, with the way the world connects with itself, the coffee house, the concert hall, the comedy club. The contemporary church, we got a comedian up front doing a 15-minute routine with a 25-minute sermon. We got a concert hall, and the band is really, really rocking good. And we'll just put in a coffee house in the foyer. Mm-hmm. Now that works if the world is your friend, but what happens when the world is no longer your friend?
It looks like silly pandering to a bygone age.
It looks like silly pandering. So this week out came the information that the Black Eyed Peas were suing a toy company for a frivolous and degrading parody. The song that they parodied was My Humps.
Yes, I'm familiar with the song. It's one of the greatest artistic achievements of the 21st century.
Absolute nonsense.
Yes.
A girl singing about her own body parts.
Yes.
And utilizes the phrase "my humps" 34 times.
In succession.
In succession, they are suing a toy maker for making a toy that's a pooping. What do you call the thing with the
unicorn?
A unicorn.
Narwhal?
A pooping unicorn in a diaper, and it poops glitter poop. And the song is "My poops, my poops, my poops." That's when the culture has just lost it. So
I have heard so many people point to a single thing in history that's like, this is where an epoch ended, when those condominiums came down, when this person gave this speech. I've never heard this indicator for a cultural
My
moment.
Humps is a cultural icon that needs to be protected
from a unicorn that poops.
Toy
Glitter.
That poops. Glitter.
Okay.
Like at some point you go, I'm not sure that being a part of this is all it's cracked up to be. I might need something that's not this. And I think we're not this.
So you think people are getting there? They're getting to the point where they're looking at this parody of a culture that we're creating for ourselves.
Well, I think they still want scriptural truth.
And they'd like something that smacks. They'd like to believe there's something that isn't this.
That isn't this.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it still has to be scripturally true. It still has to be winsomely presented.
Sure.
It still has to have real community that gives you strength for your life this week. But I think if given a choice, more and more people would say, I think I need the not this.
I mean, I think your finger's on the pulse in terms of what's going on. I might point to a different indicator of the failure of the moment.
It's not going to be the Black Eyed Peas.
It might not be that Black Eyed Peas unicorn situation, but I see it. I think everybody feels that there's something really off about how we're doing things right now. I think also so much of what's happened in the last 20 years is a dialogue of Gen X growing up and the youth group experiences they had in the 90s. What do we do with that? That kind of worked when the world was small, but then you add the internet and an awareness of the rest of the planet and everybody else's experience into those parameters and the way we kind of built out Christianity for young people in the 90s, and the record keeps scratching. There's got to be a better way to make all this stuff fit together.
Yeah.
The theology of God, scripture, church, your ethic of what you do with the outsider or the person you disagree with or you vote differently than. And maybe you're with me on this, maybe you're not, but I'm actually optimistic that we are grinding through that and getting to the place where we can start to see the other side and come out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty hopeful that that Christians are in a better place. I'm not sure the clergy are. I think the clergy are still pandering. Let me make sure. Okay, I've got a couple of minutes before I have to get a haircut.
Fair enough.
I got to walk over to the barber. So anyway, I do think you're right. I think individual Christians are somehow getting in touch with their own need for formation and their own need to live their faith in the world and to love their neighbors. I'm just not sure mostly that clergy I think clergy are following, not leading, unfortunately.
What do you think is wrong? Why is that?
Well, I think the pressure of, I come from that world with the pressure to do whatever it takes to fill the seats. You're evaluated on Sunday attendance and not evaluated on spiritual growth. You become what you count. Our bishops were, during Jim Crow, they were evaluated on how many churches. So sending all of your black Christians to a different building sounded like a good idea if you're evaluated by how many churches you have. Today, we're evaluated by how many churches you have. So we have bishops keeping churches with 15 people open. That's not a church, that's a small group. But you become what you count.
What should we count instead?
And if we're counting Sunday attendance, we'll do anything you can do. Let's put an octagon on the stage and,
sure,
do funny things. So, Jesus said, go and make disciples and baptize them and teach them to obey all I've commanded. It
on
seems
the way
like,
out the door.
Yeah, we ought to find some kind of a metric around, making disciples and not just making pew sitters.
What if you live in a time when that's really, really hard? I mean, sometimes the passing game opens up and you can take 30 and 40-yard chunks downfield.
You can take a big...
Sometimes you're in really tight, difficult conditions and all you can do is grind out 1.5 yards here, 3 yards here with the running game. It feels like that's where we've been.
Sometimes we knew what we were doing, like we knew what we were doing when we sent out, when Perry Noble sent out how to do mass baptism pamphlets. He knew what he was doing. Get all the really attractive people inside to come forward and line up 10 really attractive people to start people coming.
Yeah, prime the pump.
Prime the pump.
Like Chuck Finney tricks.
Yeah, Chuck Finney stuff. Like when we're doing that, we know what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And there are a million God-honoring, Jesus-loving, faithful pastors grinding it out day in and day out and not growing. And sometimes do the right thing for the right reasons and nothing happens and we look dumb. And sometimes we're just doing the exact same stuff and the Lord blesses it and we look brilliant and they want us to do a book tour. I think most clergy are faithfully slugging away all the time and when the Lord moves, we look really smart. And when the Lord doesn't, we look like we're droolers.
I'm always looking for what each different expression of Christianity brings to the table. Like, what's the unique contribution that this expression of Baptistic thought brings? What would the church be deprived of if you guys didn't exist, if you guys didn't exist? What's the unique thing that the Episcopal tradition brings to the table right now?
We're the monkhood of the believer. We invented the one-year Bible, and we're generally much more interested in reading the Bible and praying with you than parsing what you believe. That's both a strength and a weakness. We're generally a little weak on theological clarity and pretty strong on let's read the Bible, pray the Bible, and go do it in the world. That's sort of what happens when Protestants and Catholics and the publicly religious are all mandated to go to church together.
Yeah, about that.
Like when by law you have to go to church together, you end up being a little generous theologically with others.
Last question. I think I know the answer based on what you've said so far. But the whole situation, the whole proposition of the church speaking the gospel and kingdom values in Christ into the culture, do you feel like the arrow is pointing up right now? Arrow's pointing neutral, arrow's pointing down?
I think it's a great time for Christians to be Christians in the world. This is a time where I think people are actually looking and searching. I heard someone say that Gen Z is Gen hungry today. And I think that's true. I think everybody's hungry for something that works and is something that's a little less divisive and a little less polarized and, which is, I think if we just do the, I've got friends who would say, we just want to be nicer to everybody. Well, that's great, but what do you do when you have actual differences? I think a better process would be, sort of an ethic of rigorous on me and generous toward you. Generally in the church, we're pretty good on, let me tell you what you need to do, and while I give myself a pass. There was a guy that was, I won't use his name, he's an old church father who's been probably misattributed to this quote. That's why I won't use his name. It's the wise man applies everything in the scriptures to himself and nothing in the scriptures to others. I think there's a real hunger for people to watch people living that kind of faith.
I know you got a haircut.
Okay.
That guy is super easy to talk to. And I think if that notification for his haircut hadn't popped up on his phone when it did, that happened there at the end of the video, I think we would still be going. In fact, after he went and got his haircut, I did another little video where I kind of walked around the church and mused about some things, a little self-guided tour. That'll be the next video on this channel. And he got back just as I was wrapping that up, looking finely cropped. I'm a little bit jealous that he has that as an option. And we ended up sitting in his office with another member of the clergy there at Trinity Parish named Kurt. And we talked church and fly fishing and the state of the world and pop culture and seminary. And I just really hit it off with these guys. And I guarantee you next time I'm in St. Augustine, we're going to be bumming around like friends and catching up on things. I just really enjoyed on a very personal, collegial level, getting to hang out with the people at this church. And I hope you really enjoyed it as well. One thing I think I'll always remember from this church visit is how the stability of this little church through the rise and fall of empires and countries and institutions like slavery, and through a civil war, and through all of the social change and technological change of the 20th century, you add all of that up, this church has seen a lot. And yet here it's been doing sacramental stuff, teaching people the Bible, doing those rhythms of the life of the Christian, that every believer a monk kind of lifestyle that Matt was talking about there in the middle of our conversation. Because it has been there doing that for so long, it was very natural as we went through that church and looked at different things like the baptistry to get into what might seem like side jaunts about little legends here or there, but they're not. It's part of the testimony of the church, is that it has outlasted massive changes in culture and life. And if the whole idea is to make every participant in your church, every Christian, a monk in terms of their rhythms and their outlook on life, then that longevity plays a really important role, especially when coupled with being deeply engaged with the Word of God. So I like what they're going for. I think it's been really effective. And I continue to be in a place where, though I am born out of and trained up in a free church, Scandinavian tradition, sort of evangelical and Lutheran in style and background, I find myself feeling tons of collegiality with many pockets within Anglicanism. Other parts of Anglicanism and Episcopalianism I don't feel quite as much resonance with, but it's a big tent movement historically, and it makes sense that I would feel tension with some parts and collegiality and familiarity with others. And that's really part of the exercise of what we're trying to do here, is to go and get a really good cross-section of the wide variety of historic creedal expressions of Christianity. And sometimes we discover that there's a wide variety within or underneath a lot of these umbrellas where you might expect uniformity, but it isn't the case at all. So what a wonderful, excellent visit. And I can't wait to get back, and I can't wait to share with you my little self-guided tour here in the next video. Huge thank you to Reverend Matt, to everybody there at Trinity Parish, to everybody who was so hospitable to me on this trip I made a few months back to St. Augustine, Florida. And also, I cannot stress this enough, thank you for being the kind of person who would appreciate a video like this. I know that there's going to be a knee-jerk impulse, something deep down inside us, when we hear things said with confidence in the name of God that don't square with our understanding or our tradition. There's going to be this temptation to have this almost anger, like this is a threat to me. Whoa, hold on, pal. And yet here you still are. You've resisted that impulse. If this isn't your tradition, if there are things there that don't square with you, if you're somebody like me, I happen to find church visits like this right now to be incredibly nourishing. And even the places where I maybe don't see it the exact same way, it's thought-provoking in ways that are helpful. But there are other churches I've visited where people say stuff and I think, man, I feel that trigger inside because I do not see it that way. But the goal of these videos, first and foremost, is to steel man somebody else's understanding of their expression of historical, creedal Christianity. And I thought we just got a great look at that here. So thank you for being up for that kind of thing. I think there's a whole lot of kingdom good. I think there's a whole lot of world good, evangelistic good, of individual soul good that can come out of this particular exercise, and tipping my cap to you for wanting to be a part of that. Also, it's expensive to make videos like this, and the only reason they exist is because some of you have decided to support this project. That is mind-blowing to me. Thank you for making this go. What an awesome, generous gesture on your part. If you want to be a part of supporting the thing, you can go and check out patreon.com/TMBH to learn more about that, or just enjoy the videos and don't worry about it because it's cool either way. All right, if you're into this kind of thing, you can subscribe and hit the little bell so you get the notification when the next video with this church comes out next time around. Thanks for hanging out with me on my YouTube channel. I'm Matt. Let's do this again soon.